that particular tweet. And then there's another one: you're not going to get rich renting out your time. You must own equity, a piece of a business to gain your financial freedom.
That one right
And
there is the most important one, which is you basically, in modern life, what happens is like the person who is the best at doing something in the world will get to do it for the entire world through a combination of leverage and distribution, accountability, and specific knowledge, all of which I talk about in the Tweet Storm. If you're the best in the world at doing something, like if you're the best teacher in the world at math, you should be teaching the entire world math. If you're the best podcast interviewer, you should be doing all the top interviews. And the returns will accrue to you, especially in this highly digital world where we live in, where the cost of distributing something is very close to zero. And so what you kind of want to do is you want to productize yourself into a business, and then you want to own that business. That is the way to make wealth. A clear example is the Tim Ferriss podcast and the Tim Ferriss brand, right? It's an eponymous brand. Your name is on it. You're leveraged through this podcast and through the books that you write and through the army of followers that you have on the various media platforms. And you're taking on big accountability, and there's specific knowledge. Only you know how to be Tim Ferriss, the learning machine, who can then connect to other learners and extract
most in your own life, because you've created wealth not just through, say, your equity and angel list, but also through many successful investments. And then I'm sure there are other ways that we could identify wealth as coming from your path that you follow.
What I like about my path is that I've made money doing a lot of different little things. So I've made, money consistently in sort of small to medium sized chunks. I haven't had like one gigantic payday that set me up forever. Although it depends on your standards, right? I'm talking about by Silicon Valley standards. Obviously, for most parts of the world, I've had many of those gigantic paydays, but they've been consistent and they've been varied in the sense of that they're completely different kinds of investments and endeavors, but consistent in that I get one every couple of years.
I just want to interject for a second, which would seem to suggest that there are principles guiding your approaches, or some systematic approaches, right? Therefore,
yeah.
You're not relying on winning the Powerball lottery or that equivalent.
No, not at all. No, there's no lottery here to win. The lottery is for losers. Lotteries are just a tax on people who can't do math. Get rich quick schemes are just other people getting rich off of you. There are no shortcuts. So what I'm doing is I am taking my specific knowledge, which is my ability to understand deeply technical concepts and communicate them to the rest of the world, to be an interface between great programmers and developers and designers and the capital markets and consumers, and using that to put myself in a position where then I can identify great trends as they're emerging, invest in those companies or help start those companies, own equity in those things, help bring them to market, help do the strategy on how to navigate the worlds of fundraising and exiting and recruiting and company building and cultures and technology development and all that, and have a brand around it. And I use that to kind of make money. And that is just one of several ways. I've also done it by investing early on in public markets and cryptocurrencies and starting funds and all kinds of things. But I don't, it's funny, I don't really follow my own principles anymore. Like, for example, the whole podcast thing and the whole Twitter thing, even though I've got reasonably good brands and followers in those, I'm not monetizing them at all. I'm not charging anybody for anything because I'm not trying to make money anymore. To me, like, making money is like you become the kind of person that makes money, and you put yourself in long-term situations where you're always going to make money. So I have the brand, and I have deep relationships with a dozen people who I know and I trust that I can do business with for the rest of my life. And they're very high integrity people, and they're very capable people, and it just makes it easy to do things. So I've set up that infrastructure. Now the money just kind of makes itself as I go about my life. I don't want to have to work hard. I don't want to have to roll out of bed at a certain time. I don't want to have to answer to somebody. So I optimize for independence and freedom. I could have made a lot more money by raising a huge fund or joining a big VC firm early on, or being an exec at one of the massive companies in Silicon Valley early on. But I always optimize for independence. I'm lazy. I wake up at 7, 8, 9, 10 a.m. I go to sleep at 2, 3 a.m. I don't work a lot of days. Some days I work morning to night, but it's just based on whatever I'm curious about. I never want to have to answer to a boss. No one's ever going to tell me what to do. I don't want to order people around. I don't want to have someone reporting to me and kind of asking me all the time what to do. I want peer relationships. I want to flow. I want to be able to do business while walking, in a forest, talking on a cell phone, or sitting in a meeting, or in front of a computer, or I want to be on a beach if I don't feel like it. The ideal would be to make money with your mind, not with your time. So if I can just make one good decision a year, and that makes me all the money that I need for that that year, then that's perfect. And that's the way it should be, because we're living in an age of infinite leverage, and your judgment just gets multiplied through this massive force multiplier through code, capital, community, labor, what have you. So if you're smart and you kind of know what you're doing, you don't need to work hard. Working hard is the least important thing. You have to pay your dues. You have to put in all the iterations, 10,000 iterations, not 10,000 hours, to figure out what to do and how to do it well. But once you know, you don't have to put in the time anymore. It's your judgment. And the judgment comes from clear thinking. The clear thinking comes from having time to reflect and to pursue your genuine intellectual curiosity. And you'll see that a lot of the great investors, for example, just sit around reading most of the time. Or Warren Buffett famously plays a lot of bridge. Obviously, not everyone can be just an investor, although that is becoming more and more democratized. And I've picked something that suits my temperament and particular capabilities. But there's lots and lots of ways to make money if you apply your mind to it. So I don't work to make money. I mean, if I make so much money that I'm donating hospital wings and universities and all that stuff, I overshot. I'm not trying to have some influence on the world through money. And ironically, I have more influence on the world through podcasts like this. And so, making more money doesn't change my life. It doesn't change the world as much as I could by doing other things. So there's not much incentive for me to make money anymore, other than just practicing my craft.
Well, let's talk about a few of your missives. Missives is probably not the right word.
Yeah, I'm not telling anyone
Uh,
to do anything. I'm not trying to persuade anyone of anything. So if people don't like it, some people get triggered on Twitter and they start arguing. It's like, just leave. Just don't listen to it.
The one I'm going to read would be a great one for people to get really upset about, or I would find it comical to look at the comments of people who are upset. But the line is this: Imagine how effective you would be if you weren't anxious all the time. Why did you put this out? And have you seen highly anxious people become people who experience very little anxiety? Is that something you've seen? But first, why did you put this up? Like, what was behind it? And then have you seen anxious people become largely, I guess, unanxious or non-anxious people?
Yeah, most of my tweets are not very deliberate or thought through. What's happening is I've been thinking about some concept for, months, years, whatever. It's just been percolating. And then all of a sudden it'll come to me sort of in like one pithy sentence where I'm like, oh, this is how I will remember this thing. This is how I can distill this down into a pointer for myself, so that when I need to make decisions, I can retrieve that whole line of reasoning. And so where this comes from is basically, like everybody after a certain age, I am taking responsibility for my own happiness and peace and quality of life. And one of the things you learn after you make money is that money doesn't make you happier. It takes care of your money problems, but it's not necessarily going to put you in a place where you're in some kind of bliss all the time. In fact, there's nothing out there that will make you happy forever. So you sort of have to take responsibility for guiding yourself in such a way that your mental state ends up where you want it. And so I've been working on my mental state, and I have, working is a big word. I don't even want to say I've been working on it, but I would say my mental state has gotten to a place which is much better than it used to be. And people will often say, well, I don't want to do that because it'll take away my ambition. I want to succeed right now. And so I've thought about that a fair bit. And is that true or not? Well, certainly for me in the last few years, since I've become calmer, my effectiveness has gone through the roof and I've been more successful. But it's hard to disambiguate that from, well, also maybe you're just later in your career, you're in a better position for it. And that's a valid criticism. So one of the things I've been trying to figure out is like, would I have been as successful? And it's hard to do the counterfactual, obviously, if I wasn't as anxious, because anxiety is, comes from fear, and it's also a motivator. It makes you get off your butt. And one of the ways to make the anxiety go away, at least until the next piece of anxiety comes along, is to go do something about it. So what is the role of anxiety? Well, firstly, I noted that pretty much everybody's anxious all the time. It's a rare human being who isn't anxious. And it makes sense. We're alpha predators. We took over this earth and domesticated or killed all the other animals. And we did that by being the most paranoid, the most fearful, the most angry predators this world has ever seen. So anxiety is built into the core of who we are. In fact, you could argue that all the mind does all day long is fear-based scenario planning for survival, and then maybe a little bit of greed for replication. So anxiety is at the core level of who we are. But certainly some people are more anxious than others. There's no question. And some people seem to be much calmer about about it. So which is more useful for effectiveness? So assuming that your goal is your motivation is intrinsic, you're doing the thing because you love it or because you really want it, and you can separate that motivation from anxiety, then I think you can take on certain superpowers. And we kind of all intrinsically know this. Like if you look at, samurai warriors, right? Like Miyamoto Musashi is in a duel with somebody else. You know that the person who is calmer is going to win. In all those movies, it's the one who's like incredibly still, then swipes with his sword incredibly quickly and is then still again. That's the winner, the one who has a Zen state of mind. Similarly, in the Terminator movies, part of the reason you fear the Terminator is because he's a robot. He's unstoppable. He's implacable. You can't argue with him. You can't communicate with him. You can't make him slow down. And he has no remorse. He just keeps coming. Or in that old Clint Eastwood movie, Unforgiven, the guy who wins the gunfight is the one who doesn't flinch. He's just keeping his cool while he's loading his gun and shooting. He's not like all over the place running around. So I just think we waste so much energy through anxiety that if you can be calm and still go about your business, it's a superpower. And I realized this myself recently where I was in a conflict situation in business. It was a high conflict situation. It was unfortunate. I think we've solved it. But as I went through this high conflict situation, I'd been through one like it years before where I was much more anxious. And I remember that time period. And I remember how much I was sweating it and how nervous I was and how I went through bouts of fear and anger and how kind of worked up I was the entire time, intense, and didn't get much sleep. But this time I was incredibly calm. And I was almost enjoying it because it was like practicing my craft. Now, of course, it's easier to do now because I have more money. But at the same time, it just didn't bother me. It was just very mechanical. And because of that, I could be very effective about it. And I could be effective about it while doing lots and lots of other things. My mind wasn't constantly spinning in a whirlpool, taking on 10 different problems and just fear-based scenario planning all the time. Most of these things were never going to happen. So I do believe that being calm and still going about your business is the superpower. Now, yes, if anxiety is your only motivator, then you have a problem. But I would argue the pure motivations don't come out of anxiety.
So let's talk about attribution here. To what would you attribute and I know that it's difficult to isolate variables, et cetera, but if, let's just say, like you have a family. So let's just say one of your kids comes to you. It's like, Dad, I'm suffering from a lot of anxiety. What should I do? Or you observe it and you want to help your kid out. What types of recommendations would you make or might you make? Another question, if you prefer it, is what has helped you to go from the whirlpool experience of anxiety in high conflict experience round one versus calm Naval in high conflict experience round two?
Yeah, it's really hard to separate all the pieces out. I mean, it comes from a combination of philosophy, yoga, meditation, getting older, having kids. Like you, I've had some psychedelic experiences, but those are very far back in the past, just a distant memory at this point. But I would say the number one thing that has been very, very important for me is meditation. And it's a stupid thing to say because it's so trite. Everybody just says it now. But when I say meditation, I don't mean sitting there and watching your breath or chanting a mantra. I mean self-examination. And meditation is a great way to do that. It's self-therapy. It's sitting there with your thoughts. So anxiety, anxiety, this pervasive, non-specific anxiety, where you're just constantly on edge about everything, that comes from an unexamined life. I think was it Socrates said like an unexamined life is not worth living. I forget who said that quote, but
Something like that.
yeah,
Yeah.
but it's a great
Aristotle, Socrates, one of
one of
those.
those, yeah, one of those smart philosopher types. But it's correct. It's your unexamined life that is causing the problems, and you can examine it in multiple ways. You can examine it through. You can have some crazy mushroom trip where it all comes out one night. You could do a lot of meditation, sitting there with yourself and letting your mind run crazy, and then seeing what's actually in your mind that your mind wants to tell you and have you listen to and have you resolve that is unresolved. It could be through therapy. It could be through reading lots of philosophy and reflection and long walks. So there's many, many ways to tackle it, but it's that spending that time with yourself to examine why are you having these thoughts. Think about it this way. We spend so much time in our relationship with our wives, our relationship with our colleagues, our relationship with our business partners, our relationship with our friends. The most important relationship you have is with yourself. It's with this voice in your head that is constantly rattling every waking hour. It's this crazy roommate living inside your mind who's always chattering, never shuts up. And you can't control these thoughts. They just come up out of you don't even know where. Quality of your thoughts, those conversations you're having in your head all the time, that is your world. That is the world you live in. That's the worldview you have. That's the lenses you see through, and that's going to determine the quality of your life more than anything else. And if you want to see what the quality of your life actually is, put down the drink, put down the computer, put down the smartphone, put down the book, put down the headphones. Just sit by yourself doing nothing. And then you will know what the quality of your life actually is, because that's what you're always running away from. That's why people, when they try to meditate, they sit down like, I hate it. I can't sit still. Why? Because your mind is eating you alive. Your life is unexamined. Your mind is running in loops over things that it has not resolved. And because they're not resolved, when you run around in your normal life, it's not those problems have gone away. It's that they're just there. They're there, but they're provoking anxiety. And what you think of as the anxiety that's kind of consuming you, and you can't identify the source, that's just the tip of an iceberg poking out from underneath the water. And underneath is this giant pile of garbage, of decisions that were made without too much thought, of situations that you're in that you haven't resolved, that you need to resolve, of problems that you have or desires that you have that have gone unmet or unmanifested, or contradictions that you're living in, or ways that which you feel trapped. So proper meditation, proper examination should ruin the life that you're currently living. It should cause you to leave relationships. It should cause you to reestablish boundaries with family members and with colleagues. It should cause you to quit your job. It should cause you to change your eating patterns. It should cause you to spend more time with yourself. It should cause you to change what books you read. It should cause you to change who your friends are. If it doesn't do that, it's not real examination. If it doesn't come attached with destruction of your current life, then you can't create the new life in which you will not have the anxiety.
Or at least parts of it, not necessarily whole cloth. So let's dive into meditation, because as you mentioned, it's a term that is used a lot, and in the minds of most, it is represented by things that you just said you do not do, like the mantra based meditation or following the breath. And you and I have meditated before. I don't know if your approach is still similar, but it is quite a, I hate to talk about trite, paradigm shift in a sense, at least in the way that I experienced it alongside you at one point, which was literally doing nothing for extended periods of
Mhm.
time. I don't know if that's still the case, but could you describe the practice a bit? Because it was such a burden lifted in a sense when the pass fail is removed. And the experience that I had after, say, a week of doing this twice a day, which is not necessarily what people would do in normal life, but was pretty profound. So, could you describe the current practice, which may be different from what I experienced?
Yeah, I actually have two different things that I do, and I almost hate calling it meditation. because everyone has in their mind a preconceived notion of what meditation is. Let's not even call it that. I would say that there are two self-examination practices that I do. And I don't even call them practices anymore, because sometimes I do them because I feel like them and I enjoy them, or because it feels right, and sometimes I don't. Because anything done routinely sort of becomes its own trap and is not going to get you anywhere. It just becomes like another spiritual high, another checkbox, right?
Now, is it fair though to say that you're able to opt in and out now because you had a certain front loading period of
Correct.
doing it
Yeah.
consistently?
Actually, I'll say there are three different things that I do, and I'll go through them. The first is I just read a lot of philosophy, especially at nighttime before I go to bed. I'll
Which
read,
ones? Schopenhauer, Maxims? Who are we talking about?
yeah, Schopenhauer, Western philosophy is my current favorite, although I've definitely moved around in that one. Eastern philosophy, I'll read everything from Osho. I know he's discredited and been canceled, but fantastic. That makes me like him even more. Krishnamurti, I don't know, Kapil Gupta, Rupert Spira. I mean, it's all over the place. Anthony DeMello, he's fantastic, actually. If you're going to start with one book, start with Anthony DeMello's Way to Love, or his book Awareness. Uh, Krishnamurti, although I've definitely moved around in that one. Eastern philosophy is my current favorite. Them. The first is I just read a lot of philosophy, especially at nighttime before I go to bed. I'll
Which
read,
ones? Schopenhauer, Maxims? Who are we talking about?
yeah, Schopenhauer, Western philosophy is my current favorite. Although I've definitely moved around in that one. Eastern philosophy, I'll read everything from Osho. I know he's discredited and been canceled. But fantastic. That makes me like him even more. Krishnamurti, I don't know, Kapil Gupta, more. Krishnamurti, I don't know, Kapil Gupta, Rupert Spira. I mean, it's all over the place. Anthony DeMello, he's fantastic, actually. You want to start with one book, start with Anthony DeMello's Way to Love. Or his book Awareness. They're both really good. But there's a ton of them. I basically read a lot of philosophers: Siddhartha, Vasishtha's Yoga, Bhagavad Gita, the Tao Te Ching. I'm always going through one of these books at any given time, and usually rereading for inspiration. And I'll read these at night. Usually there'll be one or two things I'll catch on to. I'll reflect on it before I go to sleep. So that is a form of self-examination, and it's not done because it's a formula. It's done because I'm genuinely interested in these things. So it's not work to me, it's fun. The second thing that I do is, which I've been doing for a long time now, is just trying to be aware of my thoughts, and not in a, sit there and be like, oh, I'm going to be aware of my thoughts kind of way, but just realizing that a lot of these thoughts that come up are unbidden. I don't control them. It's not like I decided to have this thought. I don't even know what I'm saying to you right now. It's coming out of my mouth at the same time as I'm thinking it. So where is this coming from? Who is this person? What is this person saying? Is this true? Is it correct? Has he been correct in the past? Is he just being paranoid now? Is he being crazy? What are his underlying motivations? And I'm not even questioning it so much, but more just kind of seeing it. And after a while, when you see it, you start seeing through your own BS. You start seeing how you're mainly just justifying whatever the heck you want to believe because it's good for your survival, or it's good for your replication, or it's good for your money, or it's going to get you laid, or any of these various things. And
when you're doing that
yeah.
reflection, is it sitting at a table, pen and paper? Is it sitting
No,
in half lotus with your eyes closed? What is
no,
that?
it's literally
What
just
does it mean?
walking around. It's just walking around.
I
It's
see.
just
Okay,
life.
got it.
It's
Got
just
it.
life.
Mhm.
Just if you say something to me, I'm always going to listen to it with a slightly critical filter because you're external to me. Applying that same filter to my own thoughts gives me a level of peace and distance from them, and the ability to see through my own BS, which I think
Right.
makes my life better. So I've
Mhm.
just found that to be a useful way of life. But there are lots of times where I forget to do it. I get caught up in some emotion, some runaway train of thought. But usually these days I can catch myself and be like, oh, okay, I'm in that mindset again. I'm having that mode of reactions again. And when the mind sort of sees me chattering, it quiets down a bit, right? And like I said, it's that back to that crazy roommate analogy, which I originally picked up from Michael Singer, by the way. He has a good book called The Untethered Soul. But the crazy roommate analogy, like you would eventually tell your roommate to shut up, or you would tell them to start justifying their claims, or you would at least at some level you start dismissing them for just kind of rambling all the time in this fear paranoid mode. So I think just kind of viewing your thoughts as sort of these unbidden things that arise from within you, but aren't really necessarily the whole story, and should be viewed with the same level of skepticism that you would apply to an outside observer. I think that framework is helpful. And if you find it to be true, then you'll find yourself doing it more often. If you find it not to be true, if you're like, no, actually, I choose these thoughts and I want to have them and that's who I am and this all makes sense to me, then you can stop viewing it with a critical eye. That's up to you. But the last one is the one that I think people think of as more traditionally meditation, which is sitting down and meditating. And on that one, I learned from an Indian gentleman, same character you learned from, who I had a very simple system, and I just found it the most compelling form of meditation I've ever tried, which is you sit there for 60 minutes. So unfortunately, not less than an hour at a time, because it takes 30 to 40 minutes to sink in past the initial chattering. So you get to the good part, or the so-called runner's high equivalent. And you sit for 60 minutes every day, and you do it for at least 60 days, and you do it first thing in the morning when your mind is clear and you're alert and you've had a good night's sleep. And you sit up with your back straight, and you can use cushions or you can use a chair or whatever. There's no magic position. And just whatever happens, happens. Whatever your mind wants to do, you just let it do. If it wants to talk, you let it talk. If it wants to fight, you let it fight. If it wants to be quiet, you let it be quiet. If it wants to chant a mantra or pay attention to breathing, you can do that, but you don't force anything. You just kind of let it happen. And so you don't fight it, you don't resist it, you don't argue with it, you don't double down on it. You just kind of let things happen. And when you do that, for at least 60 days, my experience has been that you kind of clear out your mental inbox, and all the craziness that was going on, all the chattering will come out. Some problems will get resolved. You will have some epiphanies. You will make changes to your life. Some will be self examination. Some of it you just get tired of. Some of it just needs to be heard once and then it goes away. And eventually you'll get to a mental state of inbox zero, where now you're just thinking about what happened yesterday. You're kind of caught up and your mind is relatively clear, and just your anxiety level goes down. You're living more peacefully. And I've been doing this for about 2.5 years now, and I probably missed about a dozen days total. But there's some days where I've done 2 hours a day or more. And I will tell you that is the single most important thing that I do. It is a sheer joy. Much of it is highly entertaining, pleasurable. Sometimes it's just flat, it's nothingness. I can't even tell you why I do it. I can't even tell you what's going on in that state. But I will tell you that that time spent by myself is the most important time that I have. And thanks to that, I am now much more self contained. I don't feel like I need other people. I don't need external sources of pleasure or happiness all the time. I drink less. I'm not attracted to trying any drugs whatsoever. It's just life is easier. It's more pleasant. I don't take things as seriously. I'm not afraid of my mortality as much anymore. I don't fear aging. I don't lust after things. I don't have this constant pervasive need to find something outside of me to make my life better. When the best hour of my day is spent by myself, then the world has very little to offer me. And I can still participate in it, but it doesn't have that grip on me that it used to. I don't fear solitary confinement. And I think that is a superpower. And I think everyone should have it. Everyone does have it. It's easy. It requires doing nothing. It's your birthright. You can't fail at it. There's no way to fail at it. Literally all you have to do is just sit down and close your eyes and just be by, give yourself a break for an hour every day. Just take the time off
Hmm.
from the world.
Few follow-ups. Krishnamurti, do you have any favorites of his, or anything that you would suggest someone start with if they have no familiarity with Krishnamurti? And I'll second Anthony DeMello also.
Yeah, I actually
But
don't
Krishnamurti,
recommend starting with Krishnamurti. He's a tough one. But if you're going to start somewhere, I started with this book called Think on These Things. There's also the
mm,
Book of Life. He's very cerebral, very intellectual, and a little confusing. But he definitely speaks truth and he walks the walk. Anthony DeMello, The Way to Love, Osho's book, The Great Challenge. And I know people think Osho's a fake guru and all that, but he had some real stuff too. He's very articulate. He understood a lot. There's a great clip from him on SoundCloud that says it's called "Life Has No Goals, No Purpose." I listen to that one a lot. There's a lot of them out there. Once you start going down this rabbit hole, you'll find them. The classics, the Bhagavad Gita, get a good translation. Stephen Miller, I think, has a good translation. He also has a good translation of the Tao Te Ching. Those are both really interesting. Again, only if it appeals to you. I mean, there's ancient wisdom in Schopenhauer. Read Counsels and Maxims. These are smart people self-reflecting. But overall, the point is not to read. The point is to inspire so that you yourself can reflect. And Kapil Gupta is an account on Twitter. He has a couple of great books. Direct Truth is a fantastic book, written very recently and pulls no punches. But all of these are basically there to inspire you to self-reflect. And if you're not interested in self-reflection, if you're not at that stage in life, then don't do it. It's a waste of time. In fact, I would say the reason to do these things is just because they make your life better, because they make you more effective, because they have some utility to you. If they do not have utility to you, if they don't make your life better, then drop it. It's useless.
I will also second the reading of philosophy. And this is not for kind of idle or abstract, like semantic tail chasing, right? It's for whatever reason, on a very pragmatic level, deeply soothing to read the insights and observations of those who are considering things that are not of today. They're not of this week. They're not of this month. They are for much broader periods of time, or timeless in some capacity, right? It alleviates some of the manufactured
Yep.
emergency and urgency of the bullshit that is foisted upon us by every possible input.
Oh yeah,
And
the news and Twitter are so toxic. The human brain is not designed to manage every emergency in the world in real time. We're not designed to process all the breaking news on the planet in our heads. And this is one of my recent tweets, but the goal of the media these days is to make every problem your problem. That's how they get attention. That's how they get clicks. You have tribal wars going on, zombies battling each other, and they want to pull you in, where Even non-participation is not allowed anymore. Neutral bystanders are not allowed. So it's a crazy world out there. There's a circus going on with the monkeys flinging feces at each other, and they want to drag you into the fight. Really, what you want to focus on is what's timeless. Timeless is great. The old questions all have old answers, and they're best consumed from the old practitioners because they were very clear-minded about it. They weren't busy trying to fit into the politics of this time. They were fitting to the politics of that time, but that's lost to us now. So actually, another great source is I have your Tao of Seneca series on Audible, and I listen to it on repeat when I'm working out a lot. So that's a very
Oh, no kidding.
yeah, the
Awesome.
letters to Lucilius, amazing,
Yeah.
amazing stuff. And every time I go through it, I learn something new.
Yeah, the Tao of Seneca, the moral letters to Lucilius. If people want to look on public domain on public domain sources, you can find these letters. The moral letters to Lucilius, also spelled as you might read Lucilius, by Seneca. And so that's an audiobook series that I've produced, and you can find the PDFs for free online as well. Let's talk about some brass tacks stuff, since I think people will be very interested. You mentioned monkeys throwing feces, tribalism. In times like this is being recorded in 2020 and first day of October, a lot of folks are interested in stores of value. They are fearful of what could happen and considering investments like gold or cryptocurrency. And I wanted you to explain one of your recent tweets. This is just from the last few days. And it is crypto stable coins dash choose between blow up risk, censorship risk, and fraud risk. What are crypto stable coins and what does this tweet mean?
Yeah, just backing up for a second, like I think cryptocurrencies are probably one of the greatest inventions in human history. And the reason why they're interesting is because if you look at the technology industry, technology plays in unregulated spaces. It's very hard for technology to change regulated spaces, as Uber and Postmates and companies like that find out. But generally, the reason technology works is because it creates its own frontier. It is a digital frontier that is being created. Now, the physical frontiers are all closed and the new world has been colonized and the Wild West has been tamed. Where do you go to create new things free of interference and regulation and kind of exercise maximum creativity? And so that's been done mostly in the technology space. And one of the areas that has been protected by technological innovation from technological innovation is Wall Street, because they have regulatory capture, very bureaucratic. The money industrial complex that runs a lot of our economy and runs a lot of Washington D.C., where 20% of our GDP goes into financial engineering and into the Wall Street casino. And so cryptocurrencies are kind of how we get around that. And so they're sovereign resistant. They're designed to be completely decentralized. You don't need the violent power of the state to enforce the value of a cryptocurrency. And it allows for truly trustless transactions between humans without some king or authority or government or corporation having to be in the middle. And so it's very liberating to disconnect wealth creation, wealth storage, and wealth protection from the state. And that's what cryptocurrencies really enable.
1 second. Let me just pause to say that at one point, you and I did a very thorough cryptocurrency 101 conversation with a domain super expert named Nick Szabo, Szabo, which people can also find for more on kind of the history and basics of some of the crypto.
Yeah, Nick is a bona fide genius and a pioneer in the space. He also has a great blog called Unenumerated that I highly recommend. But anyway, so the best known cryptocurrency is Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is trying to be the new gold or the new Swiss bank account, kind of all rolled into one. And it has some advantages, as a store of value. It can be stored digitally, so it's hard to seize. Down to millions and trillions of a Bitcoin. Difficult about it is it's not really private. It doesn't, although there are parts of it that are private, it's not completely private. Can it be hijacked? Can it be centralized? Can it have a bug? Can it break? And every year that Bitcoin survives and goes through one of the various challenges facing it, it gets more valuable as people entrust it a little bit more and more. But it is extremely volatile. You buy Bitcoin, you're buying a very speculative asset at the moment, and you're speculating that it will become digital gold or possibly even, all store of value, and so be incredibly valuable. But along the way, there's lots of hiccups, and at any point, it could break. It could go to zero. And so a lot of people who are now participating in the crypto world, they're building a decentralized Wall Street. They call it DeFi, DEFI, for decentralized finance. But I actually think it's more like DeFi as in just defy the government, DEFY. So I think we're seeing, yeah,
Governments love that.
yeah, exactly. We're seeing a whole new casino that's better than Wall Street spring up in decentralized finance. Unlike Wall Street, this one is 24/7 open. It's 365 days a year. It's available around the world to everybody. It's trustless in that it's, there's math and algorithms and code underneath that, not Goldman Sachs front running your trades or whatever. Not that I'm saying they do, but there's flash boys and kind of all that kind of craziness that goes on. And you can program it to do things and to make bets or hedges or calls that you just can't even do on Wall Street. So I think we're building a better Wall Street using cryptocurrencies. But everyone who participates in that doesn't necessarily want to take on the volatility of these cryptocurrencies. So we've created these things called stable coins, which track the value of the US dollar, so that when you're trading, for example, you can still do it in dollar denominated terms. And this is a tricky thing, because the moment you're now trying to track some asset in the real world like dollars, then you have to basically peg the value somehow to something that exists in the real world. And cryptocurrencies do best when everything is on the blockchain, when everything's electronic and digital and controlled by computers in the cloud. So these stable coins have come along that mimic the value of the US dollar. And the best known ones are Tether, USDC, which is Coinbase's coin, and MakerDAI, which is an algorithmically stable coin. But there's no
Now,
free lunch in life.
pause for 1 second. Well,
Yeah.
should people think of what would be a comparable that people might be more familiar with? It's not an index. It's like an ETF, or how would you think about, is there another
These are digital dollars. These are designed so that you
long term over short term? And
I mean, that is
I
the
want to.
that is the entire challenge, which is long-term thinking gets you long-term results. And I've said this 1,000 different ways. In business, you want to play long-term games with long-term people. In your modern life and addictions and kind of just dealing with the avalanche of all the abundance of things that are thrown at you that are really traps, like video games are a trap. There's a shadow career that substitutes for your real career, or smoking weed or drinking alcohol substitutes for like pleasure through more simple things like sunlight and walks, and porn substitutes for sex, and the list just goes on and on.
I thought you were saying walking, sunlight, and porn. I was like, now we're talking.
Right.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
sounds about the trifecta.
But look at the related tweet I had is the modern devil is cheap dopamine, and some interesting people on Twitter point out to me actually the ancient devil is cheap dopamine as well. But in modern times we've just hyper accelerated it. The modern mind is overstimulated, the modern body is understimulated. We've just taken all the creature comforts and we've maximized them to 1,000 times, and so literally all the success in life boils down to a variation on the marshmallow test, where can the kid like hold off on eating the marshmallow for 15 minutes in exchange they get 2 marshmallows. And the claim is it turns out to be a big predictor for future success, although like many psych experiments I don't think it replicates well. But anyway, so it just boils down to long term versus short term. And if you can just adopt long term thinking in your mindset, you're just going to have a much easier life. Or as our favorite trainer Jerzy Gregorek says, hard choices easy life, easy choices hard life. That's it. Right. So just, can you take the long term view in anything? Compound interest applies everywhere. It applies in relationships. It applies in money. It applies in health and fitness. Can you change your habits to read the kinds of books that you think will serve you best in the long term, the foundational books? Can you change your eating habits so that you're eating healthy food as opposed to unhealthy food? Can you create an exercise routine that you can do every day or every other day so that it's a consistent part of your life? And so I think a lot of it boils down to just choosing the long term or the short term. And all the hacks, the good hacks, basically help make the long term choice palatable, or they help inspire you to kind of keep your eyes focused on the long term. So an example is if you're doing something that you love, if you're running a business that you enjoy, it's probably going to be more fun than playing a video game. If you come home at night from work and your first instinct is to play a video game, you're suffering at work. You're working just as hard in the video game, but the rewards are all fake because they're going to change the rules on you, or some 13-year-old kid on the internet will destroy you because they just play that video game all day long. And I used to be a hardcore video gamer. I had a lot of fun doing it, and I did learn playing games for sure. But at this point, at this age, I pick up a video game. I'm doing it to get away from suffering, and I'm not really getting anything out of it. I could play the video game of investing, or I could play the video game of starting companies, or I could play the video game of go and play tennis, and that would be good for my health. So it's good to find. So I think a lot of it is about finding the thing that you can do that is fun for you, that looks like play, that feels like play to you, but looks like work to others, that you can do that sustains you for the long term. So, for example, in foods, what you want to find is you want to find what is the health food out there that other people consider healthy and is nutritionally healthy profile, but that I find tasty. Because if I can create those foods, if I can become a good cook and create great foods that I enjoy eating and I like them and I can eat them regularly, but they're actually super healthy, that's amazing. That's a hack now. Now I'm eating for the long term, but I'm not giving up too much of the short term pleasure. The same way, being in a good relationship is going to beat watching porn, and having a good career or working an enjoyable job or hacking on some code that I enjoy is going to be far more productive than playing a video game. I don't want to sound preachy, but I will just say that my love for reading came from another one of my tweets is read what you love until you love to read. So just fall in love with the idea of reading itself. So it's okay to read the junk food stuff. Just fall in love with reading and eventually get bored of the simple stuff and you'll go to the more interesting stuff. And I love to read enough that I don't like watching TV. I don't watch movies. People start talking about shows that they're watching on Netflix or what have you, and I give them this empty look. I don't watch shows on Netflix. They're not interesting. It's far more interesting to me to go for a walk and be meditative, and I'll be in a very happy place, or to read a book, which will be intellectually stimulating. And sure, once in a while, watch a movie with friends or with my wife, but it's a social thing. I'm doing it as a way of kind of sort of being on the same common ground as them. I'm not, I would never watch a movie on my own unless maybe I was trapped in like a 15-hour airplane flight and I was really bored and I run out of everything else to do and I just want to zone out. Even then, I don't think I watch a movie anymore. So I just feel like a lot of it is like finding the hacks, finding the things that make the long term feel effortless to you, and then you win.
Okay, last question. First, a recommendation. If you ever do decide to watch something,
Sorry, before we finish that topic, very
oh
important
yes,
on people. Find the people that it doesn't take work to be around. The best relationships don't feel like work. You make the other person happy being yourself. They make you happy by being themselves. Everyone's honest. No one's putting on an act that they can't carry on for the next decade. Same thing with friendships. The best friendships are friendships that were formed over nothing. It's not because you went to school. It's not because you studied on the same thing. It's not because you're working together. It's not because you enjoy rugby or whatever. It's because your chemistry matches. Your temperament is similar. And so you can be friends with this person for 30 years, 50 years. So the compound interest in relationships part, ironically, means that the best relationships, whether friendships or family or love, are the ones where you don't have to work too hard at them. So you don't have to sustain that workload for the rest of your life and you can do it effortlessly.
yeah, totally. Well, one of your quotes that I think of often, and I might be paraphrasing this, is if you want to avoid conflict, rule number one is avoid people who are constantly involved with conflict. Right? I mean,
Yeah.
something along those lines.
I mean, for example, when you're in a relationship, just watch how the other person treats their worst enemy, because eventually they'll just redefine you as enemy and you'll get to feel that behavior. So I think the number one criteria I look for in a relationship is that person has to be kind. They just have to be a nice
Mm.
person, and because eventually in a certain context, you can always be reclassified from friend to enemy. So you just want to see the boundaries of someone's ethics. If you see someone being bad to a server, or someone engaging in unethical behavior, or suing other people, or fighting other people all the time, it's only a matter of time before they fight you. So just stay away from these high conflict people. Everyone has conflict. No one is clean. But that said, like, there are definitely people who engage in conflict and do it regularly and they make it a part of their lifestyle. Just walk away. It's not worth it. There's plenty of
You've
good
been
people who are low conflict and easy to get along with. Out. Even then, I don't think I watch them to 1,000 times. And so literally all of success in life boils down to a variation on the marshmallow test, where, can the kid like hold off on eating the marshmallow for 15 minutes in exchange they get 2 marshmallows? And the claim is that turns out to be a big predictor for future success, although like many psych experiments, I don't think it replicates well. But anyway, so it just boils down to long term versus short term. And if you can just adopt long term thinking in your mindset, you're just going to have a much easier life. Or as our favorite trainer, Jerzy Gregorek, says, hard choices, easy life, easy choices, hard life. That's it. Right. So just can you take the long term view in anything? Compound interest applies everywhere. It applies in relationships, it applies in money, it applies in health and fitness. Can you change your habits to read the kinds of books that you think will serve you best?
Phrasing this is, if you want to avoid conflict, rule number one is avoid people who are constantly involved with conflict, right? I mean, something along those lines.
I mean, for example, when you're in a relationship, just watch how the other person treats their worst enemy, because eventually they'll just redefine you as enemy and you'll get to feel that behavior. So I think the number one
Involved with conflict, right? I mean, something along those lines.
I mean, for example, when you're in a relationship, just watch how the other person treats their worst enemy, because eventually they'll just redefine you as enemy and you'll get to feel that behavior. So I think the number one criteria I look for in a relationship is that person has to be kind. They just have to be a nice person. And because eventually they'll in a certain context, you can always be reclassified from friend to enemy. So you just want to see the boundaries of someone's ethics. If you see someone being bad to a server, or someone engaging in unethical behavior, or suing other people, or fighting other people all the time, it's only a matter of time before they fight you. So just stay away from these high conflict people. Everyone has conflict. No one is clean. But that said, like, there are definitely people who engage in conflict and do it regularly, and they make it a part of their lifestyle. Just walk away. It's not worth it. There's plenty of
You've
good
been,
people who are low conflict and easy to get along with.
yeah, low conflict, low maintenance, who can also be brutally candid when necessary, right? Which doesn't equal high conflict.
Well, one thing I've noticed, and I haven't written the tweet on this because I've had a hard time figuring out how to say it, but the people that I want to spend time around these days, when I look at what the common characteristic is, they're highly self-aware. They're very, very aware of themselves. They're not running on autopilot. They don't get angry easily. They don't get unhappy easily. They don't take themselves too seriously. They have a certain separation from their own thoughts and personality that prevents circumstances and their personality from overwhelming them. They don't have a victim mentality. They're not caught up in some story of what happened to them when they were younger. They've had those issues for sure, but they've just gotten past them and been like, I don't want to be that person. I don't want to be trapped in that mindset. They're not trying to signal all the time how important they are, or who they know, or what they've done,
How virtuous
or
they
how
are.
virtuous they are. They're not virtue signaling or bigoteering. They have low egos. Generally, I can literally plot on a line. The more self-aware somebody is, I guarantee you, the more attractive that they are to a large number of people. And to the degree that I've achieved any modicum of fame, and fame is a trap, and I'm going to pay for this. I know I will pay for this. But any modicum of fame that I've achieved, I think, is because I am one of the few people who has been successful in business that thinks out loud in public. And because I'm willing to think out loud in public, that's a risk that I take on. It improves my thinking, but other people say, oh, yeah, he's somewhat self aware. He's thinking about himself. And I think that helps inspire other people to also say, okay, it's okay for me to think about myself. And I just find hanging around self aware people is a lot easier than people who are running on autopilot, almost like NPCs,
Mm-hmm. NPCs. What does that mean?
non-player characters. It's a reference to certain kinds of video games where it's like a computer control character, right? They're predictable.
Got it. All right. So speaking of games, this is the final tweet
The
in
final
the
tweet,
podcast
final
space
boss,
on tweets.
final boss.
Here it is. The reason to win the game is so that you can be free of it. And my questions about this are, read it one more time. The reason to win the game is so that you can be free of it. I would be curious to know what game you are free of, or what game you're playing so that you can be free of it.
I like to think I'm free of almost all the games at this point. What are the games? All of life is games, right? You start out with the family game, you do the school game, the grades game, the getting girlfriends and boyfriends game, the getting married game, the having kids game, the making money game, the having the career game, the getting famous game, the dressing well game. It's so much of it social games. There are a few that are not games, like meditation. You're not doing. If you're scoring points in meditation, you're doing it wrong. Yoga, these are single player games, right? So it's really the multiplayer games are the ones that suck you into society and into anxiety. Now, you kind of have to play them. You have two choices towards peace in your life. One is you can play these games and you can win them. And when you win them, this is the hard part, realizing you've won and stop playing new ones or setting new goals for yourself that are even higher and higher. It's like my friends who have made so much money and they continue, all they try to do is make money and they just don't seem very happy about it. It's fine if they're happy, if they're like Elon Musk seems like he's having a grand old time. That's fine. But if it's making you miserable and you continue doing it and you only have one life and you kind of can't see past that, then I would argue you're playing the game too far. So there's kind of two ways out of the trap. One is not wanting something is as good as having it. Right. I think it was Liad Chabot said this on Twitter. I thought it was really good. Or there's a recent Socrates quote that I retweeted where he was taken to the story is he was taken to a market back in ancient Greece, and it was full of luxurious and fine items. And he said, there are so many things that I do not want, right? And it was ridiculous. He looked at all these fineries and said, so many things here that I do not want. And I thought that is freedom. That is power. That is self-contained. That is a person who has found himself and needs nothing outside of himself. That is so inspirational. So the same way I look upon the world and I say, well, I could just say that, right? You can't just say that. If I just said, there's so many things that I don't want, it's not true. I want the money. I want the girl. I wanted the fame, or I wouldn't have gone on podcasts and I wouldn't be on Twitter. At some level, that is true. So obviously there's certain things that I want. I'm not a monk. I'm not living in an ashram. But what I can do is I've gotten the things that I want. And I'm careful not to want more. I don't want more fame. I don't want more money. Or if I get it, it's fine. It's part of the craft. It's part of the bonus. So I have to be careful about about not unconsciously taking on new desires. If I'm taking on a new desire, I better go fulfill that. So these are all just games that I'm playing. And you got to play some game. You're alive. You might as well play something. Now the question is, what game do you play, and how do you get out of the game so you're not just trapped playing that game forever? And one way is you choose your games very carefully. If you're a monk, you only choose very, very few games to play, or you play no games and you live content, blissful, harmonious, peaceful. Or the other is you play the game and you win it, and then you say, I am now free of this. So what that tweet is the reason to play the game, sorry, the reason to win the game is to be free of it. It's a reminder to myself that for the games that I've won, it's time to let go of them and to be free of them, and not to unconsciously double down by comparing myself to the Joneses and continuing to level up and level up and level up and level up. And then one day you die. And then you're like, okay, that was pointless. Like, I did all that work for what? Like for nothing. So if you're not enjoying it anymore, if you've already won the game by the definition you had when you started playing the game, and one hack is to set the definition early on so that when you go past it, you've won. To not get trapped into playing this game forever and just living in some anxious future as opposed to actually enjoying yourself in the present, you have to know when to stop playing the game. And so to me, the reason to play these games is to win them, and then you can be free of them and to see what else then that you want to do or not do, not to keep playing the same game forever. Because these games the adult games are very cleverly designed. You can keep playing them infinitely. And they're all ups and downs and ups and downs. And I guarantee you, every time you get money, you'll be afraid you're going to lose it, or you're going to compare it to the next person who has it. Or every time you get famous, now that's an image that you have to live up to. And now insults can hurt you. And now you don't have your privacy anymore, as you've written about. So all of these games have downsides. Or if you're, you're good at dating, you have a lot of men or women in your life, then you're also going to have a lot of relationship trauma, and you got a lot of tumultuousness, you got a lot of hurt people, you got a lot of emotional drama in your life. So you just have to kind of realize when you won the game and say, I'm done with this. So I would aspire to be like Socrates and say there are so many things in this world that I do not want. And I like to think that I'm kind of there for the most parts. Either I don't want it or I have it. Now, of course, there's a
Mhm.
fear of losing it, which is always there, but I don't want to pick up new desires unconsciously. And I don't want to keep upgrading my lifestyle and my expectations to match my circumstances. Otherwise, I'll be on this treadmill forever.
We are all playing games, and the key is knowing which game you are playing so you can at least attempt to consciously choose the game. Finite and Infinite Games by James Carse is an interesting read. And I just want to close with, and then you're certainly more than welcome to add any closing comments, but a quote that really makes me think of you. It's one of my favorite quotes from Feynman. So Richard P. Feynman. Once again, here's the quote. The first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool.
I love that quote. I love that quote. I read it when I was 9 or 10 years old, and I've never forgotten it.
It is so important, and not anyone else, perhaps more than anyone else I know, have gone to great lengths to become self-aware. Furthermore, and this is, I think, one of the distinguishing characteristics for me that you represent, becoming self-aware and spending time on the timeless while also reserving the right with competency to be a very high level operator in the real world, right? Because you can be not of this world by opting out completely and go into a world of introspection, but in truth, lack the resilience and emotional awareness to interact with any type of real stressor, which doesn't appeal to me, certainly. And you can be so engulfed by being in the world that you lose self awareness. You stop realizing that you are playing certain games. You become addicted and self identified with things that come from sort of consensus reality. That's also not appealing. But you have managed in a way that I find fascinating to combine the cultivation of self awareness with operating in the world at a high level.
I wouldn't say I'm necessarily there yet, but it gets a little easier every year. Like, yeah, the Feynman quote is a brilliant one. He's right. We fool ourselves all the time, and I still fool myself all the time because I still have strong beliefs and opinions. For example, even though I don't tweet a lot about politics, I do have strong political opinions, and that is a form of fooling myself because politics is a man-made game. It doesn't really exist in the real world. There's no tree is aware of politics, and I do, even though I don't like to, even some of my beliefs are filtered and line up in bundles based on my chosen media sources and whatnot. So I fool myself all the time. But just if you can fool yourself a little bit less, then you can navigate reality much better. It doesn't take a lot. Most people are just living very unconsciously, unexamined life. So it just gives you kind of a leg up. And I agree with you in that you can always like check out of the game and it's easier that way, but then you're fragile, right? You kind of build resilience by working out hard, and it's hard to be calm until you've lost a lot and won a lot. Like you have to see the ups and the downs and the ups and the downs before you get tired of the dopamine chase and you sort of realize like, okay, this is down, but eventually there'll be an up, or there's an up, there'll be a down. I know how this game works. So one of the things I've been tracking recently is I've been trying to kind of make a list of what are the activities that are sort of non-dual in nature that don't create their own opposite down the road. So chasing money does create anxiety and suffering down the road as you compare and you win and lose and so on. Chasing fame also has its downsides where you're not open to insult and attacks and being canceled and whatnot. So what activities are intrinsically true in and of themselves and are a free lunch? And so those include things like meditation, yoga, creating art, playing, reading for fun, not necessarily for knowledge or education, writing, journaling. You can even be building a business as long as you're doing it for the craft of it, for the flow of it, not necessarily for a given outcome, although it's hard to do that. At least externally, it seems like Elon Musk is doing that. He's building rockets to get to Mars, not to make money or to be famous. Although he's getting those as byproducts. So I think that kind of this whole not fooling yourself, paying attention to yourself, not taking yourself too seriously, examining your own thoughts from first principles, and kind of doing activities that are done intrinsically for you as opposed to for the external world. They just make your life better. I'm not doing these things to be a stoic sage, right? Honestly, one of the downsides of the stoics is they don't look like they were having a lot of fun. I still like to have fun. Just make your life better, and kind of uh, doing activities that are done in not taking yourself too seriously, getting those as byproducts. So I think that kind of this whole not fooling yourself, paying attention to yourself, not taking yourself too seriously, examining your own thoughts from first principles, and kind of doing activities that are done intrinsically for you, as opposed to for the external world. They just make your life better. I'm not doing these things to be a stoic sage, right? Honestly, one of the downsides of the stoics is they don't look like they were having a lot of fun. I still like to have fun, right? Now, obviously, a loss has been a lot in translation. I know they had their vomitoriums and they had their orgies and whatnots, but the Stoics just, at least the way it's modern projected. And this is one of the reasons why I do like Osho. People give Osho a lot of flack, and they should. He was a little crazy in some ways, but he was having fun. He had a good time, and you're alive. You have one very short life. When your life ends, it goes to zero. It's to you. It's indistinguishable from your perspective. Your death is indistinguishable from the end of the world. As far as you're concerned, the world has disappeared, because when you came into existence, the world appeared. When you go out of existence, the world disappears. And that is so consequential that it makes the rest of your life inconsequential. And that is a form of freedom. And so you should enjoy yourself. You should not suffer in this life. If you are just constantly suffering, then figure out how to get out of that suffering. If you can't get out of that suffering, then figure out how to redefine your internal worldview so that you don't necessarily view it as suffering any more than the extent that you need to get out of it. These days, we borrow a lot of suffering on behalf of other people. A lot of people want to be a little Christ carrying crosses for others. It's a miserable existence. You're actually not doing them any favors either. You carrying their cross isn't making their life any better. The better way is for you to be happy and successful and healthy, and then go save them, like literally save them physically, not necessarily just, sit around suffering for them. Or at least that's the life that I choose to live. I'm gonna end with one story.
Mhm.
There was a guy that I met in Thailand, Craig, I forget his last name, but he used to work for Tony Robbins. And I met this guy, and we were on vacation in Thailand, and he was just the happiest person. He was just happy all the time. And he just seemed to be able to laugh it off. And as far as he had a good life, he had stuff going for him, but it wasn't like, he had this incredibly enviable life where you would drop everything and move to Thailand and adopt his lifestyle. He had an okay life, but he was just happy, and not in a forced way, but he was genuinely happy. And so I asked him, I said, like, how, what's your secret? Why not? And he said that, he used to work for Tony Robbins, and he used to fly around setting up events for Tony. And, he was always sitting in the front row and taking notes and setting things up and learning and listening. And he just kind of started seeing through his own internal BS. He got to this point where, like you said, like he was fooling himself into unhappiness. And he just decided one day, he said, you know what? I have no responsibility to anybody in this world other than me. And like, or if I do have a responsibility, there's kind of this weight of responsibility that goes on where we're like, oh, I need to live up to some imagined self. What he realized was, he said, somebody in this world, somebody has to be happy all the time. That is somebody's job, to be that role model for people in the world. That might as well be me. I'll be that guy. I'll take on that burden. And he decided to be the happy one. And I just thought that was simple and brilliant. And he did it, and he lived it. So I want to be that guy
Yeah.
who is successful, peaceful, happy, enjoying life, blissful, meditative, spiritual, successful, and as healthy as I can be, and famous and rich, and not give a damn about any of it. So if I lose it all tomorrow, I still want to be happy. That's it. That's where I want to be, and I'll just make that decision, because somebody has to be that person. It might as well be me.
I love it, man. Naval Ravikant, otherwise known, aka Naval Ravikant, but Naval Ravikant, at Naval on Twitter, Naval, and he has the podcast, of course, Naval, Naval. You can find that anywhere you find your podcasts, the blog, nav.al. Previous conversations we've had, and we've had quite a few, you can just search Naval on the website, tim.blog/Naval. Anything else you would like to add? Any other resources, places people can say hello on the internet, recommendations, asks of the audience, Naval?
I'm mostly on Twitter. Eric Jorgensen recently put out a book which had a bunch of my sayings called the Almanac of Naval Ravikant. It was very nice of him. I don't make any money off of it. It's free on the internet. You can Almanac of Naval Ravikant. Eric Jorgensen recently put out a book which had a bunch of my sayings called the Almanac of Naval Ravikant. It was very nice of him. I don't make any money off of it. It's free on the internet. You can just download it. I think at Navalmanac. Clever little turn of phrase. Yeah, I think that's it. We'll see you on the interwebs. I wish everybody has a wealthy, healthy, and happy life. Like, go get it.
Thanks so much, Naval, for taking the time. This is awesome. And to everybody listening, thank you for tuning in. And until next time, don't fool yourself. Sit down, spend some time with your mind, and don't be too hard on that roommate in your head. Hey guys, this is Tim again. Just a few more